Hey, friends, this is Joel Richardson, and I have kind of a special, different thing that we're going to do today. I was chatting with my friend Jose Diaz just the other day. We were talking about some of the news reports that are coming out in the aftermath of the earthquakes in Turkey. And I don't know if any of you have been following along, but there's actually been a few different articles from different sources, different news sources that have made mention of the man in white appearing oftentimes to kids that are trapped under the rubble. I'm going to actually let Jose introduce himself, but I've known Jose now for a couple years, and he and I both work with GCM, the Global Catalytic Ministries. But actually, Jose, you've got kind of quite a resume in terms of ministry the past decade or more. I'm actually going to have you introduce yourself to everyone because a lot of people watching this don't know who you are. And then I just wanted, basically, Jose and I were just talking about this, and we said we should just chat about this on Zoom and just share it publicly because it's really kind of an awesome story. And I love Jose, but Jose, go ahead and just introduce yourself. Tell everyone just sort of briefly about your past history and ministry and sort of how you ended up with GCM.
Yeah. Well, it's an honor to be here, and it's good to be here with you, Joel, via Zoom. So I have spent, my wife and I, when we live in Philadelphia, you might have heard of it. We gave you America, cheesesteaks, and Rocky. But we live in Philadelphia right now. And so for about several years, we helped lead a ministry called Heart of David. And it was a global worship prayer ministry. We'd launched two schools of worship, one in Austin, Texas, one in Philadelphia. And then we had like this pretty big network of kind of like worship hubs, if you will, really big, like the Tabernacle of David, stuff like that. There were like 30 different hubs in America and then 20 countries around the world. And we oversaw that. We did that for years, going, speaking at worship conferences, training worship leaders, which is funny because I am not a worship leader. I mean, I am probably the worst singer that I know personally.
I don't know. I'm pretty bad myself.
Yeah, we should have we should be the next videos, have a competition. But so we did that for years, and it was pretty amazing. We've been to 41 countries, 6 continents, 41 countries, and seen a lot of cool stuff with worship, prayer, the nations, and so did that whole thing, traveled. I'm 34. It's pretty good for 34, probably flown about 1 million miles. So it's doing all that, going. And then 2020, this little thing rolls around called COVID, and finally had enough time to just be home and pray, which is kind of crazy when you're in the ministry world. And so during that time, two things interesting happened. I feel the Lord tell me to walk away from everything that I'm doing. And essentially the word that the Lord gave me was, you've come to a place where you only do ministry when you're on a platform behind a pulpit with a microphone in your hand, getting a check. And the Lord says, I'm grieved with you because I didn't just die for that. There's more that I want to do through your life. And I have this vision. In the vision, I'm digging this hole in the ground and I'm planting this deeply rooted tree. And essentially the Lord says, I'm going to teach you how to make disciples, and you're going to learn how to get your hands dirty again. Like your life's too safe, too clean. During this time, I read an article, Christianity Today article, probably one of the only Christianity Today articles I've ever read. And the topic was, Iran is the fastest growing church in the world. And I'm like, oh, pretty cool. I don't know much about Iran, but that's kind of interesting. It was actually it surprised me. That's I think why I read the article. I was like, Iran, that's nuts. A few months later, I do this online teaching for a leader. And it was 2 topics I did on the Tabernacle of David and why you should pray for Israel. And afterwards, she says, hey, I want to introduce you to a leader who's based out of the Middle East. I feel like you guys would really connect. And I'm like, okay. And kind of my joke is I'm expecting to talk to this like really old, short, like fat guy with like hair coming out of his ears that like doesn't speak English or whatever. I don't know what to expect, and I get on with this particular leader. A lot of people know him as Pastor X. It changed my life. It was this radical, transformative moment where I felt like I was just baptized into the world of the Middle East. It's almost like finding out this city you've lived in your whole life has a subway system underground you didn't know about. You kind of heard a little bit here and there. It was like, whoa, I had no idea. And so I mean, it was this radical, transformative moment. I hear about what the Lord's doing in the Middle East. I hear about disciple making. I hear about church planting. I hear about, and then stories, which we're going to talk about, Jesus appearing to people. I remember one of the statements that he made is that the Holy Spirit is making a mess out of the Middle East, and we're just the cleanup crew. And I hear about there's no celebrity preachers, no buildings, all that stuff. And that was kind of my introduction into this whole world. And we felt this call to roll together and didn't know where the journey was going to lead. And it was interesting because I'd read some of your books before even getting connected to this whole world. In particular, when a Jew rules the world, because I really love Israel. And so then I heard, you were a part of this and things like that. And so for the last few years, 3 years now, I've been working with GCM on the executive leadership team, but more specifically in the worship and prayer world. And so we have all these young worship leaders. There's a couple of things that we're doing, but we have all these young worship leaders that really resonate with the underground church, with the Maranatha message, a lot of this stuff. And so kind of raising them up to write songs that carry this language and carry this DNA that just like the film did, as far as, in the visual arts, to take songwriters to carry that whole storyline, and then working with disciple makers and incorporating kind of underground worship, house of prayer models, both in the West and in the East. So that's a quick nutshell of the last few years.
Yeah. And when you say the film, for those who aren't familiar, talking about Sheep Among Wolves, there's 1 and 2. A lot more people saw part 2, but Sheep Among Wolves is basically a film that was created. It was created by Frontier Alliance International Studios. So this actually has caused a lot of confusion, and we always have to sort of explain it. So it was created by Frontier Alliance International. I sit presently as the chairman of the board for FAI. And one of the things FAI does, or one of the branches of FAI, is FAI Studios. So a few years ago, when I actually first met a lot of the Iranian leaders, the leaders of the underground church, I had brought Dalton with me. I won't say what country we met them in. And we sort of last minute, it was literally last minute. I think it was about a week before I was about to leave. And I asked Dalton. Thomas is the director of FAI. I said, hey, do you want to come? I'm going to go meet a bunch of the leaders of the Iranian church. He said, sure. And I said, we should just make a documentary while we're there. Maybe just bring a couple extra guys, camera guys. And we met with them during the day. There would be teaching and worship, and we interviewed some of the leaders. And then we would take off and go get B-roll and, film some of the, just the city that we were in. And we got home, and within a week, Dalton had already edited it together, and we put out a film. So like within 2 weeks, we had the idea, we filmed it, it was edited and released free on YouTube as Sheep Among Wolves. And it was amazing how many people responded to us over the next couple of years, young people. That always makes me sound old when I say young people, but I guess I am old at this point. But folks saying, that film changed my life. I wanted to give my life to missions, or specifically to the Islamic world. And that was incredibly touching. But then a few years later, we released Sheep Among Wolves 2. Now, here's the thing. The film is about GCM. So it was created by FAI, but it's about Global Catalytic Ministries. It's about the ministry work that GCM is doing. And so that causes a lot of confusion, because it's one ministry trying to promote and support another ministry. And it's one of the things, by the way, that I love about both GCM and FAI is this very open-handed approach to saying, hey, let's, we're in this for the kingdom. We're not here to build our own little individual kingdoms. Even I guess about a year and a half ago when the American pull-up from Afghanistan happened. GCM has been heavily involved in the rescue and relief project in Afghanistan. Dalton, again, the director of FAI, said, I want all of our offerings this month, all of the offerings given to a ministry, he said, give them all to GCM. You very, very rarely hear of ministries doing that. So I love the culture, and we're all friends, but again, very different ministries. So yeah, now Jose, you jumped on, as you said, sort of toward the beginning of COVID. And one thing I want to highlight before we start talking about some of these articles that we're talking about is you've been the primary leader who has been overseeing the Wednesday prayer meetings, and that's still the case,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we've been doing the past few years with GCM is every Wednesday we have a Zoom call, a prayer call. And this is something that really anyone is invited to jump on. Do I have that right? Is this open?
Yeah. It's open to the public. Yeah.
And so I figured it's probably worth mentioning now. Again, it's just a prayer primarily for the underground church and many of the leaders that work with GCM. If someone wanted to jump on that and just join the prayer meeting on Wednesdays, how do they find that, and how do they get connected to that?
Yeah, I think so. There's actually the simplest way is probably to email prayer@catalyticministries.com. I think that's our website.
So it's prayer@catalyticministries.com.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That would be the best place that you sent there, say they saw the video, and we'll send you the Zoom link. It's all on Zoom.
Yep. Yeah. And, again, I've just appreciated your faithfulness in that and just leading the prayer. Jose is one of these guys that, as he said, he's 34. I'm 51. So actually close to 20 years older, but he's one of these type of guys that when I meet him, I go, oh, cool. The Lord is raising up these amazing voices who carry a lot of the same messages. And, if I happen to die suddenly, if I'm the next person that dies suddenly of a blood clot, I feel confident knowing that I can just pass off my mantle, and there's other very able-bodied, godly young guys that can carry the baton until the return of Jesus. So that's a high endorsement, but I appreciate Jose very much.
Wow. So that really touches me, man. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. And you can tell he's been preaching for a while because his voice is all raspy and beat up. By the time that he hits my age, he'll be like Johnny Cash.
Or Macho Man Randy Savage.
Yeah, either way. And Jose is a great preacher too, by the way. So, okay, so I want to jump in just because this was sort of the issue that caught both of our attention. And by the way, again, for those watching, this may be something that we do on a pretty regular basis. One of the things that we do with GCM is we have weekly organization-wide ministry meetings, and we check in with everyone.
Yeah.
Keep everyone accountable, make sure everyone's staying on track. There's a very clear focus on making disciples and this type of thing. But I mean, every week there's an amazing testimony. There's some story always, not only from the Middle East, but all over the world. And so, you get off the call. I'm oftentimes on the call, teary-eyed, just listening to the stories. I mean, just really moving. And I go, we need to share these stories with the world more. There's obviously security issues. We need to be careful. Sometimes we have to change names and this type of thing, but we get to hear some awesome stories. And so we're talking about maybe just doing this pretty regularly and just doing little, GCM Middle East gospel updates. Here's what the Lord's doing. That's really what we're called to do, right? Is just encourage one another by saying, hey, God's alive, God's real, God's moving, and he's moving over there, he's moving here, and he's still present to move in your life. That's really what the body's for. So, okay. So some of these stories, obviously everyone is just well aware of the ridiculous. I mean, it's insane, the devastation from the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. Um, I don't even know what the official numbers of dead are. I haven't checked in a few
I think
weeks.
they're over 50,000 for sure. Over 50,000 last I saw.
Over 50,000 official deaths. I think realistically, by the time they clear out the rubble, it'll probably be well over double that.
Easy. Yeah.
So you're talking instantly, just devastation. I know a lot of you saw some of the pictures, and there was one picture that just, this Turkish father was just sitting in the rubble, holding his teenage daughter's hand, just reaching over. I think she was 15, and she was dead. She was in her bed, and the house collapsed on her, and just, her hand sticking out, just this father just sitting there holding his daughter. Like, the level of, as I said, insanity, like, it's just way beyond our ability to even begin to wrap our heads around it emotionally or otherwise. But in the midst of this, as I said, unfathomable tragedy, there's been a handful of stories that have emerged. And again, these are coming from Muslims, or nominal Muslims, secular Muslims. I mean, the point is, these are not Christian testimonies. These are not, evangelicals telling stories about, oh, Jesus appeared to me. These are Turks and Syrians that are telling the stories, saying, little kids saying, I was buried under the rubble for 4 or 5 days, but a man in white appeared to me, and he fed me, he comforted me, he talked to me, this type of thing. So I've actually pulled up a few of the articles. I'm going to read one here. This is from a website called, I'm not even sure what the name of it is, sot.com.al. And the headline says, "A man with a white beard fed me." The 6-year-old tells the incredible story of how she survived the tragic earthquake in Turkey. And so it starts out, it says, incredible stories are circulating on social media about earthquake survivors in both Turkey and Syria. Turkish media have published an incredible story of a 6-year-old girl who, after being rescued, said she was fed by a man with a white beard during the days, multiple days. Like, a little 6-year-old girl not drinking or eating can't survive more than like 3 days.
No way.
I'm not sure of how long, and she's under the rubble. Like, who is with her under the rubble, taking care of her? A Turkish journalist asked the little girl if she was hungry. She replied that she had eaten. She even stated the man carried the house on his back so that it wouldn't fall down. A story bordering on unbelievable, which stands out in the fact that the little girl was tested and her body had all of the right proteins and so forth. It goes on about at the time there was 34,000 people dead. So, simple story. I want to say this was in the Albanian press in Albania.
Which is also a Muslim country. Albania is as well.
Yeah, Muslim majority. In fact, a lot of people don't know this, but Albania actually had more. When ISIS started recruiting, this is now 9 years ago. ISIS was 2014, the summer of 2014. But when ISIS started recruiting people from all over the world, Albania and Kosovo, some of the Kosovar-speaking nations, they were actually the highest number of recruits to ISIS actually came from Albania. Now, it's a Muslim majority nation, but you also do have a very high percentage of Christians there. The evangelical church is very small, but more in the traditional Christians. So Christians and Muslims do largely live side by side there in Eastern Europe. But in any case, to have the story circulating in the Turkish media, and then in Albania picks it up. Here's another story. This one was featured. This is on a website called Church Pop. and it was also on EWTN, which is a Catholic site. This one says, "A person in white fed me. Boy stuck under the rubble miraculously survives the earthquake." Another story, a 5-year-old boy, he was under the rubble for 8 days.
It's impossible to survive. That's impossible.
Right. Yeah. This is a baby for all intents and purposes. Upon questioning, authorities asked how he survived for so long. According to the French organization SOS Christians of the East, the boy said a man dressed in white provided him with both food and water, and then he disappeared. Jesus ate fish, and then he walks through a wall. You know, I love the nature of the glorified body. 5-year-old boy rescued after 192 hours spent under the rubble testifies that a person dressed in white fed him, brought him water, and then disappeared.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really just highlighting the story that was on social media.
And if you look at the picture of the boy, it's pretty wild. He doesn't look like he was trapped under rubble for 192 hours whatsoever. That's what's crazy to me.
Yeah. Think of the trauma of an adult, you know, an adult that would be able to sort of gather their senses, but a little kid in that situation, if it was not for someone being with them, feeding them, taking care of them, stuck under there, this is like lifelong, you know, personality distorting trauma. But the kid comes out and he's just like, he's fine. So I want to turn this over to you, Jose. You know, a lot of people hear about the work in the Middle East. They hear about these types of stories, a man dressed in white or a man with a white beard. Now, we're not claiming that, you know, this is not like a doctrinal statement on how Jesus grooms his hair and his beard, you know, or this type of thing. But it's just interesting that you have these numerous stories. He's dressed in white, or he's glowing in white, or he has long hair, or he has a beard, this type of thing. And oftentimes, on the heels of these stories, you know, you have families, you have individuals, families, and even like entire communities coming to faith. So just touch on this, because this is something people hear a lot about. And again, I know you've been around for a few years, so you've heard a few of these stories, but just off the top of your head, doctrinally speaking, let's just say as a theologian, from a theological perspective, what's your perspective on these? Is this real, or are these stories just made up?
No, I think it's 100% real. I mean, and I think there's a few things, and there's videos that have actually circulated that I've seen where people are disputing this stuff, or you know, saying that it isn't real, or why would the Lord do that? I think just before even the theological point, this isn't a Christian, like a kid that's grown up in the church or knows the Bible. And I think the fact that it's coming from kids, you know, for me is really, really, really powerful. But from a theological perspective, absolutely. And you know, when I think of the verse, a verse that comes to mind is, "The Lord wills that none perishes." And I think of the Lord's heart for the Middle Eastern world. And this is kind of where it's predominantly happening right now, right? Is the Middle Eastern world. And I think of the Lord's end time plan and purposes. I feel like one of the reasons this is happening, and maybe this isn't where you were thinking theologically, when I think of the Lord's like end time purpose for the Middle East, and I think of the urgency of what the Lord is trying to do, it makes sense to me that the Lord is showing up the way that he's doing. But I mean, just from another point to look at it biblically, is we see this all throughout the Old Testament. You know, we call them Christophanies, where the Lord would show up, you know, pre-incarnate Christ, whether it's Melchizedek, whether it's the, you know, the angel in the beginning of the book of Joshua, and Jesus is showing up, revealing himself, or revealing things or truths to these people. I have absolutely no doubt. And here's the number one reason why. And specifically in the GCM case, almost 99.9, if not 100% of the people that have this sort of experience, that have this man in white show up, almost all of them, and again, 99.9 to 100% of them, come to faith. They come to know Jesus as Lord, right? They're not confused. They don't spin off into some weird theology or some weird doctrine, but it actually does something in their heart. And the one thing I would say to people that have an issue with this is you have to understand the price of becoming a Christian in a lot of these places. Like it's more than, a little prayer. I remember talking to Pastor X. In some of these countries, baptism is automatic execution. So I think one of the reasons Jesus is showing up even in some of these places is because of the weight of the decision and what it costs to become a Christian in a lot of these countries. And so having that real deal supernatural encounter with Jesus, I think really solidifies the deal for a lot of these people.
Yeah. And, I mean, it's probably a natural thing for people to ask. They go, okay, but hold on now. You just said there may have been as many as 100,000 people that died. And you go, okay, so we've got 2 or 3 stories that have come out in the media about these kids that the man in white appeared to. Well, why didn't he appear to 10,000 or 20,000? Like, why isn't he appearing to all of them? Why just a few? And ultimately, that's just, this is the case of, well, it's God's decision. He does this. Yeah. But I think it's clear that you can say the Lord has something more for this little girl and this little boy, this little 6-year-old, this little 5-year-old. And that may or may not become clear for another decade or 15 years. Like, we don't know, but the Lord intervened. Like, whatever this deposit is in his sovereignty, in his leadership, it will be later, in retrospect, we'll look back and see the wisdom of the Lord in this story. I don't know if I've ever told this publicly, but when I was 12, I guess I was probably about 12 years old, a friend of mine was sleeping over. I actually just went hiking with him this past year. We reconnected after like 30 some odd years, and hadn't seen him in literally since I got married 25 years ago. But he was sleeping over, and I just had this little Crossman Pumpmaster 760 BB gun, just a plastic little cheap BB gun. And as we were doing, we were just shooting each other, like pumping it up 1 or 2 times, maybe 3 times, shooting each other. And it was late at night, and he took the thing and pumped it up like 15 times, shot me point blank in the chest at an angle. I was laying down under the covers, and he's just sitting there aiming it at me. I'm staring down the barrel of that BB gun. Like, he could have easily just put it right into my eye socket. But I jumped up, and he was probably, I say point blank, he was probably 3 feet away, right in my chest. It penetrated 5.5 inches into my chest cavity. And the BB is still to this day resting. Literally, here's my heart, here's my pulmonary artery and my aorta. And it's actually touching all 3.
Oh my God.
Sitting there. And, I was trying to pop it out of the skin. I'm figuring it's just embedded in the skin. I'm trying to pop it out, and blood's just pouring down my chest. In fact, my buddy, when I just saw him with his thick Boston accent, he was like, "That was so scary, bro. There was just black blood pouring out of your chest, and I thought you were going to die right there." But I'll never forget, I was this foul-mouthed little hooligan 12-year-old in the hospital. First, they did x-rays, and the doctor's eyes went bright, wide. And then they did a CAT scan. And then they actually had to do an angiogram where they put a camera in an artery up my leg. And finally, they're like, it's just touching, it hasn't done any damage. It's just sitting there. And then I remember the doctor came in, and he just said to me, again, I was an incredibly unruly little kid, swearing, because they had to put these like huge IVs in me because they were concerned that at any moment my aorta was going to burst, and they were just going to have to pump me with the volumes of blood. And I was in all kinds of pain, and I was just, again, just screaming. And I remember the doctor just saying, "Well," he said, "I don't know how in the world this happened." He said, "The chances of the BB stopping right there the way it did," he said, "it's like 1 in a million." And then he said, "God has something more for you." And, I was this super nominal little Catholic, but I remember when he said that, he said, I don't know why God just saved your life, but he has something more for you. And this little 12-year-old kid, it touched me. I stopped and I was like, oh, wow, like God has a plan for my life. And I think it's fair to say that the Lord's wisdom has been proven all these years later. Hopefully my aorta doesn't burst at any moment now, although I suppose that could happen. But no, I have no question that these two kids, the Lord has marked their life, and he'll use them both in a mighty way. If not, if they don't come to faith now, if they haven't already, that over the next, as they grow into teens and young adulthood, I have no question the Lord has his hand on their life. So you said, you've seen videos circulating, people bashing the idea, sort of the doctrinal police. So I'll just say the name. A lot of people know the program Wretched. There's a man named Todd Friel. He's kind of connected with like John MacArthur, and that sort of camp, that school. So now obviously these guys are super anti-charismatic. I mean, across the board, they don't believe in any of the ongoing activity of the gifts of the Spirit, but oftentimes also will poo-poo sort of any activity of the Holy Spirit, including cases like this. So I know Todd Friel has just said, this is all nonsense. It's not true. It's not happening. Touch on that a little bit, Jose, just because, again, and I want to say this, I'm not bashing.
Yeah.
I know some folks watching this, just love John MacArthur and they're from that world. And look, I'm part of the body of Christ. I'm a mere Christian. If you love the Lord, you're my brother or my sister. I don't personally resonate, or at least I don't agree with that super anti-charismatic theological position, but just talk about that a little bit, because I haven't watched the video, but I know that he's done this a few times. And it's, from my perspective, it's almost kind of funny and sad to see someone saying like, that's not the Lord. It's reminiscent of the Sanhedrin, when they were dealing with Jesus, and Gamaliel stands up and says, hey, like, if this is the Lord, just it'll succeed, but like if it's not, it'll die out on its own. Like you don't need to go out of your way to try to debunk it or bash it. And I feel like these guys are almost desperate to debunk the things the Lord is doing to validate their theological position. But anyway, I just want to let you jump in because I know you've seen some of the videos.
Yeah, and I just want to say real quick, because before I get into that, I was just thinking about this, and you were talking about, well, why not? Why didn't he appear to the 100,000? Why do these two kids? And I was thinking of even your story. I was thinking of everybody that's standing there while Stephen is being persecuted, being martyred, but the Lord picks one guy out of that crowd and physically appears to Paul. Well, he sees him as a light, knocks out of the horse. And it's, why not to everyone else in the crowd? Why just to that one guy? And obviously the rest is history. And it's like, we don't know. Can you imagine this kid become a Paul to his nation? But yeah, I was on YouTube one night, and I don't remember. I think what it was is I was watching something somebody posted on the whole Asbury thing, more just like, I think it was like live footage, and just kind of interested. And you know how YouTube works, you click something and then it'll recommend all of these videos that are and every video was somebody giving their expertise on whether or not this is a biblical revival. I mean, it was just like, it was actually insane to me. And so I'm familiar with Todd Friel and Wretched because they're kind of bigger, they're kind of more well-known. And so I kind of clicked on his thing, and it was his qualifications. And again, and I don't want to sound like I'm bashing Todd. And because I do want to say this, I appreciate people that love the Bible, and I appreciate people that love truth. So it was his whole deal in Asbury. But on the side, it was, more recommended videos. And his video was his thoughts on whether or not he really believes Jesus is appearing as a man in white to people in the Middle East. So obviously, given the world that we're in, I was really intrigued to see what he had to say. So he gets on there, and I will say, and I'll give him props. The first thing he said is like, look, if this is really happening, actually, it's kind of funny. The first thing he said is, I'm going to say the one nice thing, and then I'm going to tap into my spiritual gift, which is being a grumpy curmudgeon, which I was like, oh man, I think I know where this is going. But he said, hey, kudos if people are getting saved. And he goes, however, and he gave 5 points, kind of his issues with it, and just 2 or 3 that I remember off the top of my head. The first one was, now that we have the Bible, there's no need for Jesus to do that. There's no need for Jesus to appear as the man in white. That's the first point. The second point was that almost all, if not most, of the reports that he'd heard in the Middle East were people that were either had a Christian background, a Christian connection, or already knew Jesus. And the third, I forget what. Oh, the third was, why would, and I'm not probably wording exactly the right way, but why would Jesus have to do that if there's evangelism going on? And I forget what the other 2 points are. And immediately, this thing rose up inside of me, and I said, hey, this is actually not fully true information, right? And so, I'm looking back at some of these things. And so the first one was, Christian background people. And I can tell you for a fact, at least all of our stories, the people that Jesus is appearing to, almost all of them, I'm not going to say all of them, but almost all of them, we have never actually introduced Jesus to them. They don't know, we don't blatantly preach the gospel. So a lot of them don't even know that it's Jesus. In fact, we have several stories. I could tell you one in particular. It's actually in the film. I think it's the shop owner. He's beginning to engage with some of our leaders, and they're talking about God. They're having conversations about God, but they never mention Jesus. They never even mention, that it's the Christian God. He just knows it's another God other than Allah. And he goes home, and while he's home one day, he says what the living room fills with smoke. He lived in a very old house. He hears the floor begin to creak, and all of a sudden there's a man in white standing in front of him. And he's shocked. He's absolute shocked at what he's seeing. So he runs out of his house, and he goes, and I think he meets up with the people who are talking to him about God. And he's like, tells them the experience. He has no language. He has no a way to explain what has just happened other than the house filled with smoke, and a man in white appeared in his house, walked in. And so the response was, are you ready to know the identity of the God that we have been talking to you about? And he said, absolutely. Who is this? Because Allah's never appeared to me like this before. And then they tell him it's Isa, it's Jesus. And immediately, he comes to the Lord. And I'll give you another story, because I think this is one of my all-time favorite stories. So there's a particular country, they hear about a man that's been having regular visitations from a man in white. It's just this old man, kind of would be like backwoods equivalent for us, right? So they drive out to this man's house to kind of hear what's going on. Now, this guy, from what I know of the story, nobody's engaged with him. One of our leaders haven't met with him. They're just hearing reports that a man is claiming that a man in white is showing up in his home and having him write stuff down. So our leaders come and they meet with the man, and they're kind of skeptical. They're like, all right, like, let's see what you got here. And so the guy's, yeah, every day a man in white shows up and he tells me to write down, to write down what he's telling me. And so they go, well, let's see what you got. Again, kind of skeptical. They take out his notebook, and in his language, it's the Gospel of John, handwritten. And so they go, do you know what this is? And he goes, I have absolutely no idea what this is. They go, do you know who it is that's appearing to you? And he essentially says, I've been waiting for somebody to come tell me, who is this man? I don't know who it is. And so they tell him it's Jesus. It's the living, resurrected Jesus. And immediately the man comes to the Lord. And so are there people that maybe have a Christian background, they've read the New Testament and so forth? Sure. But I can tell you from a lot of, and those are just 2 stories, there's a lot more stories that I could tell of people that are encountering Jesus that either don't have a background, they've never engaged with the New Testament. The second one is, well, if the Bible's already out there, Jesus wouldn't have to do this because we have the Bible. And again, they're referring to that First Corinthians 13 passage, when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away with, right? And so there's no need for Jesus to do this. But the point, and I think it's an oversight, is most of these people, even though the Bible is available, either it's illegal in their country, they've never engaged with the Bible, they have no connection to the scriptures whatsoever. And so for a lot of the people, and again, I want to be careful with my statements, a lot to, if not most of the people that we engage with, when we start working with them, it's the first time they have any sort of connection to the Christian Bible at all. And so that's a huge point. So they're unfamiliar with the Bible. And, you know, and I don't remember if it was him or someone else that made the point, well, the Quran talks about Jesus and mentions Jesus, so they have some level of familiarity. But they're not talking about the living resurrected Jesus. They're not talking about a Jesus that's still alive and still speaking, you know. And then I think one of the points that he made, and I mentioned, was with evangelism and so forth. And again, you know, evangelism doesn't look like in these countries what it looks like in most in Western countries. People aren't just walking around preaching Jesus, talking about Jesus. You know, they're not having stadium crusades and so forth. So for the most part, Jesus is still a mystery. He's shrouded. He's not as attainable. People don't know much about him. They have no familiarity or no connection. So when I'm hearing these stories about Jesus appearing to people in the Middle East, I find it difficult to not believe. I find it difficult to be critical or weary of it. And above everything, and this is the thing that hits home for me when I think about the costliness of following Jesus, the cost of how much it costs people socially, in their families, and in some cases their lives. And I think about Jesus's heart to reach these people, that evangelism actually is so scarce in a lot of these places that he's showing up as Jesus the evangelist to appear to people in the Middle East. Man, it absolutely makes me fall more in love with Jesus, and I'm more in awe with his kindness and his goodness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it strikes me as weird that someone who loves the Lord, you know, let's say a Todd Friel, you know, a fellow brother who loves the Lord, would feel it necessary to bash something which produces praise for the Lord, produces someone who is following the Lord, a disciple of Jesus, because it doesn't fit within their particular theological. No, I get it. I understand. You know, I have no problem with someone saying, well, we need to be cautious about these things. I have no problem. My problem is when it's sort of mocked, belittled. And, you know, like if I just laugh about this on YouTube, somehow it makes it not real. But you and I know some of the individuals, like we know the individuals whose lives were changed. In Sheep Among Wolves 2, one of the gals that we interview, I've actually heard her share her testimony a couple different times, and we use her as the centerpiece, the storytelling centerpiece of the film, which revolves around the song, you know, the devil's going to hang on his own gallows, the song Gallows, which is just a beautiful song. But her story is, and I'll simplify it, you know, she was sexually abused by, I mean, virtually every man in her life. If I remember right, her father molested her or even raped her.
Her father's business partner that was molesting her. And then when her father found out about it, he was so ashamed, he started beating her out of embarrassment.
There you go. Okay. Yeah. So he, and, you know, it just went on and on. And of course, this is incredibly common in Iran. But when all was said and done, she tried to take her life. Now, in the film, it says that she tried to hang herself. When I heard her tell the story in detail the first time, she said that what she hung herself with, she was in a room. She went in a room. She locked all the doors, stood on a chair or something, and she had a really thick copper electrical cable, like a really thick, and she put it up through the loop in the light fixture, wrapped it around her neck, and she said it was really thick cable, wrapped it around her neck, and then kicked the chair out And then she awoke the next day, or woke sometime later on the floor, bruises all around her neck. And she had clear recollection of having a vision of being on Jesus's shoulders as a little girl. She was a little girl. She was on his shoulders and he was carrying her. And she cried and she said, "This is what I always wanted. This is the kind of relationship I always wanted with my father, was this close, intimate relationship where he cared for me and carried me." And she goes, "But I had it with Jesus." Anyway, she woke up, the cable, she said, was laying on the floor perfectly straight. She said this thing, like, it was so thick, like once you bent it, you couldn't have just unbent it. She was laying there on the floor perfectly straight. She goes, "That alone said to me that something supernatural came, and all the doors were locked. There was no evidence that someone got me down." And, she just had, and then she became a believer. So you look at her life now, here she is, a vibrant, joy-filled worshiper of the Lord, who literally full-time is an evangelist in Iran, one of the fastest growing churches in the world, one of the highest persecution, most dangerous nations in the world to be a former Muslim who's actively sharing the gospel. And I go, how can you bash that? How can you mock it? You can say, I'm cautious about these stories because they don't fit within my theological framework. I get that. But to belittle it, mock it, I don't get that. Because there's just too much Jesus glorifying fruit. There's too much goodness that comes out of these stories. Now, he was not a man in white. It was just sort of a vision that she had of Jesus. But again, that wouldn't fit in that sort of hyper anti-supernatural, anti-charismatic worldview. There's another story. Sorry, go ahead.
No, this is kind of a cool follow-up to that story.
Yeah.
She was doing some evangelism with a girl that was a hardcore Muslim, and she's kind of wrestling with this. At this point, they're having open conversations about Jesus. The girl is really wrestling with whether or not Jesus is real or Jesus is resurrected. So she goes home and she prays to Allah. She says, "Allah, you must reveal to me, confirm that you have a son." And so she goes to the Quran and she does like the number one thing that we tell people not to do, like whatever passage she opens up to. And the passage says, I think it's something like, "How dare you say that Allah has a son? You're a like pretty much refutes it. She calls this girl and says, "You're a liar, you're a blasphemer, don't ever call me again." Hangs up on her. A week later, the same girl, this is why I love that we're doing this, because this is like one of those staff meeting conversations. I remember exactly where I was sitting when I heard this. The girl calls her back a week later and says, "Hey, what does Jesus," because she knows her story. She goes, "What does Jesus look like?" And the girl says, "Why do you ask?" And very politely, she goes, "Shut up and tell me." And she goes, well, she describes
very politely,
very polite, very tender-hearted. So she describes what she saw in the vision. And so the girl says, "Well, why do you ask?" She goes, "I saw him." She goes, "What do you mean?" Because, "Well, after I hung up on you, a few days later, I was walking downtown and I looked up and the clouds moved and a man appeared in the clouds. And I realized who it was. He revealed himself. I don't know if he said it audibly or she knew in her heart. She was so embarrassed. She looked down and his silhouette was standing in front of her. And so when she called the girl, she's like, "What did he look like?" They saw the same person. And the girl was so moved. She gave her life to the Lord and essentially was like, "I want to bring this to all of my friends. I want my entire social network. I want to bring to the Lord." And so I'm with you. I mean, this is like, you don't hear this sort of evangelism tactic in evangelism school. I mean, it's different. Does Jesus still appear? Isn't he seated in heaven? How can he come down? I mean, there's some of this is mystery, but the point is, man, we can't deny, we can't be, how can we be grieved or whatever, like critical of people coming to Jesus, even if it's outside of our norm? Anyway, sorry. I'll kick it over to you.
No, absolutely. The verse that I think has been cited at different times is, and off the top of my head, I'm trying to remember where it is, but I think Paul, he quotes I think it's Nahum. Oh, it's actually a couple different passages, but how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. And then Paul goes on, he says, kind of like we have to go and share the gospel. We have to preach. He says, because how will they hear without a preacher? And so it's kind of a rhetorical question saying, like, if we don't go, no one will. Like, if they are to hear the good news, we have to preach, with kind of the inference saying, like, it's our job. Our job is to preach the gospel. It's the Holy Spirit's job to then convict and this type of thing. And of course, in most of these cases, you hear, as you said, follow-up fruit. The one qualifier that I would put on all of these stories, because a lot of people, and especially in the charismatic world, they get really excited when they hear all of these stories. And again, to me, they're true. Like, I've met the people whose lives were changed, who told the stories. And there's just too many of them. There really is just too many of them to say this is not a phenomena that's not happening, this type of thing. But the qualifier that I would say is when we look at the Goliath of the Islamic world. And a lot of Christians are very intimidated and even afraid to talk to Muslims. They just have this prejudice based on the media and stereotypes and different things like that. They think all Muslims are terrorists or this type of thing. Yeah. But there is the reality that a lot of Muslims are far more equipped and trained and prepared to share their message with Christians than many Christians are prepared to share the gospel. And defend things like the historicity of the crucifixion, the resurrection, the Trinity, to defend with confidence the doctrine of the Trinity. The Christians are often far less prepared to share these things with Muslims than Muslims are prepared to attack and bash and belittle them, which is unfortunate. But the point is this, is the overwhelming majority of the Muslims who are coming to faith, they come to faith because someone was faithful to share the gospel with them, to simply open their mouth, to get involved in their life, to pray for them. Yes, oftentimes you hear these stories of the man in white appearing, like as though Jesus himself is personally evangelizing them. These are the stories that get all of the airtime. They're stories that everyone talks about, but we need to remember that 95% of the salvations happen simply because someone was afraid. They were nervous. They didn't want to, but they opened their mouth anyway. They were obedient, and they acted as an evangelist. As Paul said, how will they hear without a preacher? And so the majority of Muslims throughout the Islamic world come to faith because someone loved them, someone took the time to love them, to share the gospel with them, and this type of thing. But you do have a certain percentage that are coming supernaturally. But I think that's a good way to sort of balance the conversation out, to say the majority do happen the good old-fashioned way, which is by sharing the gospel. And so we can't be lazy, is the point. We can't say, oh, Jesus is doing it, we don't have to bother sharing the gospel. Yeah. Jesus will save them.
Joel, if I could add into that, when I was talking about my conversation even with Pastor X, what moved me more, obviously the stories are amazing. And I think, and because even Todd points out, it's mostly happening in the Middle Eastern world. Like I said earlier, I think a lot of that has to do with God's end time plan for the Middle East. I think there's this urgency. But when I remember talking to Pastor X, and he shared some of those testimonies with me, what moved me the most wasn't the stories, was the like you said, obedience, the radical obedience that believers in Muslim countries have to share the gospel of Jesus. I think of like the phrase, and it's an intense phrase, but it did something to me. It's that whole death before disobedience. Like, we would rather die than disobey the Lord. And for them, that obedience is sharing the gospel. I remember when Afghanistan happened, we got a prayer request from a leader when Afghanistan fell and the Taliban took over. One of their prayer requests is that God would create an opportunity for them to be hospitable to the Taliban. That doesn't like make sense to me. Or they're sticking it out. They're so committed to the gospel. They're so committed to people being saved. And we saw multiple hundred churches planted, there and so forth. But I think you're hitting the nail on the head. is don't let the supernatural stuff, which is amazing, overshadow that there are believers risking their lives that are faithful, they're fasting, they're praying, and they're going out and sharing the gospel and being a light in one of the darkest parts of the world. That's really the highlight of the story, more than anything, is the obedience of, actually, Pastor X called them the little people. They're just small people. They're ordinary, everyday people. They're shopkeepers, they're college students, they're just people like you and I that had an encounter, whether supernaturally or not. And salvation in and of itself is a supernatural process, whether Jesus appeared in white or not. But they're everyday people that are choosing to follow Jesus and be a light in one of the darkest places of the world. That's really the highlight for me of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a theory as well. I just got back from Saudi Arabia a couple of weeks ago, which, as a side note, we should talk about this sometime. The underground church there in Saudi Arabia is drastically expanding. Arguably the fastest growing church in the world. Still under 1,000 national believers, so it's not massive numbers. But just a few years ago, it was closer to 100.
What's the percentage growth, right? They're like 60% a year, I think.
I mean, the numbers that I saw most recently it sounded like just under 700 national believers. And as I said, just a few years ago, there was like 100. So
that's amazing.
It might even be higher. I mean, it might be like 100% growth per year. It's kind of just the past few years, it's astronomical. But yeah, I'll just say this, hanging out with a bunch of the Bedouins, we go to, the real Mount Sinai there in Northwest Saudi Arabia. And I just love these guys. I'm like, I mean, a lot of them don't speak English, and I don't speak good Arabic, or they probably speak a little bit more English, but I mean, communication's difficult. But these guys, if I can just say this, they're just rednecks, which means I get along with them just great. I just love these guys. Like, they're just hilarious. Like, they just love gathering around that campfire and cooking up some food and laughing and just all the stuff that good old boys like to do. And yet, they're committed to, as they're, leading the tour, to stopping at different prayer times and praying and this type of thing. And so, like, look, obviously religion wise, we disagree, but it's hard for me not to have tremendous respect and appreciation for Muslims. And if there's one thing, here in the West, the trending and the tendency of most is much more rapidly toward an anti-religious perspective. Vague spirituality, vague mysticism is all acceptable if you talk about how spiritual you are. But as soon as you start talking specifically about Christianity, absolutely not. This is it's the one thing that's acceptable to bash and make fun of in popular culture. Well, I would say either Jews or Christians are the one thing that it's okay. Well, I guess, yeah, there's a few things that are okay to bash publicly, but the point is this. If there's one general thing you can say about the Muslim world, and again, Muslims are as different as people are different. If there's one general thing you can say, is that Muslims tend to be a very God-focused, just a God-focused people. And the scriptures say, seek and you shall find. If you're actually diligently seeking God, and of course the prayer, every Muslim, every time they pray, they pray to Allah, the beneficent, the merciful, and then they say, oh Allah, guide me to the straight path. Guide me to the straight path. And even, as you think about the Arabs today, they view themselves as children of Ishmael. I mean, the name Ishmael means God hears. God hears. And I think of that, millions and millions of Muslims every day praying, and many of them very sincerely, oh Allah, guide me to the straight path. I think the Lord hears those prayers. Yes, they're sort of praying they're looking for God in all the wrong places. You could say they're praying to the wrong God. They're reading the wrong book. As Christians, we would say that. but the Lord still sees their heart. The Lord sees Hagar. He sees and hears Ishmael. And I believe the reason that we're seeing so many of these salvations in the Muslim world is because they are crying out, they are hungry. And the gospel is for those that are hungry. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst diligently, genuinely, sincerely for righteousness. The scriptures say they will be filled. And so I think that's one of the big reasons why the Lord is moving so powerfully in the Islamic world, and why, quite frankly, here in the West, we don't see it as much, because we're giving ourselves over to self-aggrandizement, to, selfies and Instagram and just me. And even the spirituality that's popular, it's all about just self-improvement and this type of thing. But the Lord sees hearts that are broken. The Lord sees the hearts that are humble, and the Lord sees those that are thirsty. And we could get into a lot of other reasons, I think, in terms of prophetically why the Lord, his future plans, what he intends to do, in the Middle East, around Israel, with the children of Ishmael, and these type of things. But I think at the foundation of it, a big part of it is because they're a hungry people, and I think we need to recognize that and honor it.
That's so good, Joel. So good.
Yeah. So listen, Jose, we've talked a while. I had no idea when we started how long it would go or whatnot, and there's tons of things that we could keep talking about. But before we go, we do want to say, if you're watching this and you pray about it and the Lord is moving on your heart, you'd like to become a regular partner with, a supporter, financially or in prayer, of Global Catalytic Ministries, we will put the link at the bottom of the screen a few different times. Again, the need it's really endless. I mean, the need is perpetual, but the opportunities are perpetual. The harvest is wide open. So we would invite and appeal to anyone watching this to, as I said, prayerfully become a regular prayer or financial supporter. Is there anything you want to add, or do you want to just close with prayer, or just anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to hit on?
No, I just to ditto what you just said. More than anything, our team is really just made up of those little people. They're committed. Right now, even in Turkey and a lot of these different places, just to continue this work. And so, more than anything, yes, financial partnership, but even as Jill said, pray. I mean, if you don't already, pray for the believers in the Middle East, pray for the harvest, pray for the work there, because there's a lot happening. There's a lot happening right now.
All right, my friend. Well, it was good chatting. So, I think the plan will be, we won't necessarily schedule anything like, let's do this every week, but I think on a regular basis, we'll just kind of have, chit chat with Jose and Joel, and just sort of share testimonies. And, basically this is what we do when we're just texting or chatting. We'll just kind of do it on Zoom and share it with the body to try to encourage, exhort, encourage, rebuke. Just kidding. all of our brothers and sisters out there. So awesome, man. I'm going to close with prayer real quick.
Awesome.
So, Father, we thank you for this time. Just ask that you would seal in our hearts everything that's been said, the good things that you want to communicate, the things that you are doing and speaking in the earth in order to encourage your people in these days. Father, I ask that you would give me, and we ask that you would give us those hearts of obedience, that we would say yes to you, that when you move on our hearts by your Holy Spirit, that we would agree, we would obey, we would open our mouths, we would overcome fear, and we would plunge ourselves into the midst of all of the good things that you're doing throughout the earth, not just in the Middle East, but wherever we live, whether it be in the United States or Canada or Australia or Indonesia, South America, wherever anyone's watching this, that you would encourage us to be obedient right where we are. So we commit these things to you, and we thank you for these things in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.